Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon video. So we recently got revealed the new starter decks, or at least a couple of cards from the new starter decks. So for those who don't know, we have Gaia Green, we have Mugen Black, and we have Venom Purple. Originally, I thought that Venom Purple was going to be more Myotismon focused, and Mugen Black was going to be more Machinedramon focused, so I was kind of off on those, but who knows, those Digimon still might make an appearance, but I was kind of correct on the Gaia being HerakleKabuterimon focused. So at least I was one correct out of the three. But regardless, we know a couple of cards from each of the starter decks, and they all have a very similar core mechanic, which is the new Digiburst mechanic in common. So what Digiburst is basically doing is you get rid of your own Digivolution sources based on the Digiburst ability, and then you get to use that ability. So Digiburst is definitely looking to be like a really interesting ability and something I'm excited to see expanded upon going forward. So going over some of the cards from the starter decks, starting with Purple, we have the new Mat. Starter deck tamers are looking to be 2-cost tamers, and they each have their own unique ability synergizing with the deck. So what Mat's ability is during both players' turn, if your Digimon is destroyed by resting this card, you get +1 memory. So this is really good because we know Purple has a lot of self-sacrificing synergy. So you could get a +1 memory just from doing a self-sacrificing ability, and then obviously if you have multiple Mats out, then they all stack. But the interesting part is it also activates it during the opponent's turn, so if the opponent is attacking into your Digimon, then you also will be able to basically take away an opponent's memory just from this ability. So if you have, let's just say, a purple blocker during the opponent's turn, and then you use it to block an attack and it's destroyed, then you could use Mat to take away one of their memory, which is still a pretty good ability, being able to not only gain memory from stuff that you're already doing, but taking away memory just for the opponent trying to pick off your Digimon. So I definitely am liking Mat, and I think he's a pretty solid card. Next, we have a new Gabumon. So this Gabumon is very, very similar to the Gabumon that we got from the second booster set. So what he is doing different is his ability is on attack, where the other one is on death, and you get to draw one, then discard one. So the other Gabumon is an on death effect, where you get to draw 2 and discard 1. But they're still both very, very good cards, and I definitely am liking this Gabumon because it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive with your purple strategies. So that way you could still do basically the same thing, and you don't need to rely on your Digimon dying all the time. And sometimes you don't always want your Digimon to be dying all the time. So I definitely like having the different options, but a similar style of effect, because as we know, purple is more trash-based, so that way being able to draw a card and then pick whatever card you want from your hand to discard for a particular setup is already a really, really good ability to have. And now that you have multiple sources of this, it's definitely giving purple a lot more power to play with. Speaking of power, next we have a new WereGarurumon. So this WereGarurumon has the pretty interesting inheritable ability where during your turn, if you have 5 or more cards in your trash, then this Digimon gets plus 2000 DP. So for purple, that's pretty good because purple doesn't really have a whole lot of buffs per se. So their megas are generally on the weaker side, and they could potentially die to security checks because they are slightly on the weaker side. They're not like completely weak, but regardless, having a plus 2000 DP buff just for having a slightly large trash, which you're going to set up yourself anyway, is definitely a very, very powerful strategy, especially with the new Mega, which is the new KresGarurumon. So KresGarurumon originally is going to be a Booster Set 3 card, and he was black. Now for this deck, he's color shifted to purple, and he innately has Security Attack +1. So the buff from, let's just say, WereGarurumon is very, very good for KresGarurumon because that means he could potentially win multiple security checks. off of his Security Attack +1 ability. But what's really interesting is the fact that Kuwagamon has this Digiburst ability. As I mentioned earlier, Digiburst is basically taking your Digivolution sources and using them as basically resources for this ability. So there's only a limited number of times you could use this Digiburst ability, but nonetheless it's still a pretty interesting mechanic overall. What the Digiburst ability is doing is this one has Digiburst of 2, where you take 2 cards from your Digivolution source, and then you put them into the trash, and then you get to play a level 3 purple Digimon from your trash without paying its cost. Now, the important thing to note is usually purple adds the clause of you don't get its when entered ability, but with Kuwagamon you do, so that's definitely something to think about going forward. But the fact that he is also with Digiburst filling up your trash is definitely some really powerful synergy, on top of which being able to revive something is very good. And then this is not a once per turn ability, so you could possibly use this twice in a single turn and get 2 level 3s out at the cost of all of your Digivolution sources. He's definitely looking to be a really interesting and really powerful Digimon, especially for purple. Next up, going into the black starter deck, we have ToyAgumon. So ToyAgumon is another 2-cost tamer. It looks like all of the starter deck tamers are going to be 2 costs. That's just kind of the trend. But this one has the pretty powerful ability where during the opponent's turn, if your Digimon is rested using the blocker ability, you could rest this card to make one of your Digimon act. So that's really good because it allows you to basically get multiple blocks out of a single Digimon. And the big problem with the blocker decks is once the Digimon is rested, then there goes your entire defense plan. So if the opponent is able to swarm the field and make all of your Digimon rested, then you just actually don't have any defense plans, and with ToyAgumon it definitely helps mitigate a lot of it. Like, you're still going to be weak to rest effects, but like now you're not as weak against swarm decks. So this is definitely going to be a really interesting and really powerful tamer to possibly play in that black blocker deck. Next up, we have a new black Agumon. So Black's original Agumon that they got from Booster Set 2 was a ToyAgumon, so now they just have a normal Agumon. And this Agumon has blocker, and this Agumon doesn't have the ability where when it attacks you -2 memory like you do with Gatsumon. So the trade-off is that he could attack, but he's a lot weaker than something like Gatsumon, but generally Black will buff their stuff anyway, so it's not like that's going to be that big of an issue. But it's definitely interesting to note that Black is getting more blockers, especially on some of the levels that a lot of other colors don't necessarily have. And I think that's a big part of Black's identity, is just having multiple different forms of blocking. So I definitely think Agumon here is going to be a really good and really interesting card to utilize. On top of which, he is an Agumon, so you could potentially use him in an all Agumon deck for whatever reason. But that's just a fun thing to think about. Next up, we have a new MetalGreymon. So this MetalGreymon has a when Digivolved ability. One of your Digimon gets blocker until the end of the opponent's next turn. So it could be MetalGreymon, it could be another Digimon that doesn't have blocker, and that's just a really interesting and powerful ability. As we know, being able to block attacks is going to be very key to how Black's strategy is, and being able to give Digimon that don't originally have blocker, the blocker ability is definitely something really powerful, because you could basically just play some big value vanilla card and then slap down MetalGreymon to Digivolve into and give that card blocker temporarily. Even though it is temporary, it's still good to have because Black has just a whole bunch of different synergies with the blocker ability. And then lastly, we have BlitzGreymon. So BlitzGreymon in Booster Set 3 was originally red, now he's color shifted to being black. He has Security Attack +1, similar to Kuwagamon, on top of which he also has a Digiburst ability, similar to Kuwagamon, except that this ability is different, in which the ability is different. So it's still Digiburst 2, so you're still going to have to remove 2 cards from your Digivolution sources, and remove them into the trash for this ability, and one of your Digimon gets plus 4000 DP until the end of the turn. So obviously this is really good because it can make one of your blockers so big that the opponent just actually can't really get through it. So it just presents a huge threat to the opponent and asks them to have an answer, and if they don't, then they just actually can't really do anything. So he doesn't have blocker innately himself, so obviously you're going to want to do this on one of your Digimon that has blockers. But the interesting thing about it is if you have possibly enough memory, then you could give MetalGreymon himself blocker, and then Digivolve into BlitzGreymon to give BlitzGreymon blocker. Then if you still have any memory left during your turn, then you could Digiburst to increase his DP even higher. So that's just something interesting to think about, but BlitzGreymon is looking to be a pretty decent card for the black deck. Security attack 1 innately, and black has a little bit of a hard time dealing some additional sources of damage. Just having security attack +1 in black is still a very, very welcome thing to see. And lastly, on to the new green deck. So we have a new Izzy. So Izzy is, again, another 2-cost tamer, and then he has the ability during your turn, if one of your opponent's Digimon becomes rested, you could rest this card to gain +1 memory. So this is really good for green because green has a lot of resting abilities, but they don't have a lot of payouts for resting, other than obviously being able to bypass their defenses if it has blocker, or attacking into it for piercing. So having the ability to gain memory just for the act of resting is a very, very nice reward for being able to rest the opponent's Digimon down. So I'm definitely really liking what Izzy is already doing. Next, we have the new Tentomon. So the new Tentomon is kind of interesting because he has a when played effect. So you're going to want to try to play him rather than Digivolve into him, but he's still decent to Digivolve into because his Digivolution cost is still cheap. But regardless, his when played effect is really, really good because you reveal the top card of your deck, and then if it's a green Digimon, you get to add it to your hand, otherwise it goes to the bottom. So currently right now, a lot of decks are playing more into Digimon rather than their tamers or options. Obviously this can change in the future, and depending on the deck, obviously it's going to change. But green being a more Digimon-based deck means that this ability is really, really good because there is a higher chance that you're going to be able to basically draw one card off of Tentomon. So the only real comparison that we have is like Palmon, where you reveal the top 3, but it's limited to adding just a level 4, and this is just a green Digimon. Next up, we have a new Kabuterimon. This Kabuterimon has all of the same exact stats as the original Kabuterimon from the first booster set, except this time, this Kabuterimon has blocker. So this is just a pretty solid card because not only is he efficient to Digivolve it into because he costs 1 to Digivolve into, which is really low for a lot of champions, but he does have just your usual blocker stuff, and green could use a little bit more blockers. So it's definitely very, very welcome to see that they got a new blocker, and it is using the exact same stats as the original Kabuterimon. And then lastly, we have a new HerakleKabuterimon. So this one has piercing instead of security attack +1. So if you don't know what piercing is basically when you attack into the opponent's Digimon. If your Digimon has piercing, it'll also deal damage to the opponent if your opponent's Digimon is destroyed. Even when attacking into your opponent's Digimon, you're still going to be able to do damage. That's just a very common theme that green has been playing into. And then he does have another Digiburst ability. And this Digiburst ability is you get to rest one of your opponent's Digimon. So that's pretty good considering the whole idea that green has been playing with is let me rest your Digimon down, then I can swing into it, and then I'll be dealing damage and destroying your Digimon. So it's just playing into the overall strategy, and then the fact that now you have the new Izzy that complements you wanting to rest your opponent's Digimon down by gaining memory is already a very, very good synergy going on for the green deck. So that's currently all we know about the new starter decks. They're definitely looking to be off to a very, very good start, and I think these starter decks are going to be more powerful than the initial 3 starter decks overall, just because they're playing with some different types of tools that the original starter decks weren't really playing with. But it's definitely good to see that these colors are getting starter decks, because initially these colors lacked the starter decks, and therefore they lacked a lot of the additional cards added to the card pool for these colors that the other colors had, and these ones didn't. So I'm definitely excited and looking forward to seeing what the rest of these decks have to offer, and if they're going to follow that same formula that they have been in the past, or if they're going to shake it up and change that formula for these decks. That's all I have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts about the starter decks and cards down in the comments below. And as always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video.